Prime Minister. Hey, back at you again. Yeah, talking about somebody who hears you, who's listening to you. Man, you've had some times in your life. Me too. Been there, done that. Got the t-shirt and the hat. But I want y'all to know something. I'm trusting in the Savior, and I know that He hears every word that we say. I can hear Paul Wills, my friend. He say something like, "Oh, wait." Listen, y'all. A pilgrim, a stranger, a beggar I be, and here I go travel alone. And the dearest of friends, they won't listen to me, and they dog me for trusting in God's Son. It's a world in its folly, its sin and its shame. Neglectfully turns me away. I still have my Savior. Praise His sweet name. You see, here's everything that I say.
Let me change it to my first name.
Okay. And He hears every word that I say. Yes, I know somebody answers every prayer.
That piece of equipment that you have in the background,
Yeah,
I've been shopping for one.
yeah, I gotta have it.
Yeah, we have one in the basement, but it's dying.
Yeah, I had that one about I don't know, a long time. Probably like 8 years or something.
Yeah, I was.
But yeah, and it was only like $300. I bought it like online.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
I think I wore out two of them.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's hard to get there, I think, but it's still kicking. So I'm up there.
It's healthy for you. Yeah. Can you hear the background music?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. The Wu-Tals will be on in about 15 minutes. Okay, it's good to see you. I'm glad to be living in the light. Everything will be all right. Oh, a Christian, a soldier, a witness I'll be. As here I go traveling on. And this world and its people, they won't listen to me. And they dog me for trusting in God's Son. This place and its beauty will soon pass away. So you better hear every word that I say. Get to know Jesus the Savior and call on His name, 'cause He hears everything that we say. Yeah, I know somebody listening, and hears everything that I say. I know somebody answers every prayer that I secretly pray. And I know somebody loves me. Ain't gonna never gonna turn you away. It's Jesus the Savior. Praise His sweet name, 'cause He hears everything that I say. I know somebody listening and hears everything that I say. Said I know somebody answers every prayer that I secretly pray. Somebody love me. You're never gonna turn me away. No. It's Jesus, my Savior. I'm just praising His name, 'cause He hears everything that I say. Somebody listening to me, He hears every word that I say. I just know that somebody answers every prayer that I pray. Yes, I know somebody loves me. Oh, get up and start over again. Oh, your trials, your troubles, your things. Won't ever keep you down. With Christ, I know you can win. Cause He cares for you. He will see you through. Yes, He's that kind of a friend. Oh, get down on your knees and then give it to God. Get up, start over again. Sometimes the road gets dark, seems nothing you can do. And the faith you've been bragging and talking about, you wonder if it's true. Oh, and the people that you thought you knew don't even act like your friends. Oh, get down on your knees and then give it to God. Get up, start over again. Oh, get up and start over again. Oh, your trials, your troubles, your things. Don't ever keep you down. With Christ, I know you can win. Cause He cares for you. He will see you through. Yes, He's that kind of a friend. Oh, get down on your knees and then give it to God. Get up, start over again. In everything, give thanks. You never know just where you will be. The Father of light, He is looking down. There is nothing that He cannot see. So when they lie on you and they persecute, and you feel you've come to an end, oh, get down on your knees and then give it to God. Get up, start over again. Oh, get up and start over again. Oh, your trials, your troubles, your things. Don't ever keep you down. With Christ, I know you can win. Cause He cares for you. He will see you through. Yes, He's that kind of a friend. Oh, get down on your knees and then give it to God. Get up, start over again. Sometimes you just cry, and sometimes you just wanna die. But we know it's working out for our good. Get up and give it one more try. On your job, you worked hard all day, but when it comes to an end, oh, get down on your knees and then give it to God. Get up, start over again. Oh, get up and start over again. Oh, your trials, your troubles, your things. Don't ever keep you down. With Christ, I know you can win. Cause He cares for you. He will see you through. Yes, He's that kind of a friend. Oh, get down on your knees and then give it to God. Give it to God. Start over again. He's that kind of friend. Oh, get down on your knees and then give it to God. Give it to God. Start over again. Oh, get down on your knees and then give it to God. Give it to God. Start over again.
Many times must I prove how much I love you? How many ways must my love for you I show? How many times must I rescue you from trouble for you to know just how much I love you?
So you
Down to you. We will know the sin and sorrow.
Okay. Hi, Brother Wutal.
Hey, Brother McClure.
Okay. I made you co-host.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And that way you can actually upload your own slides, correct?
Yes, actually, let me try now. Let's see.
Okay. You remember Alicia?
Yes, how you doing, Alicia?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Okay. But are you still there? Okay.
Yeah. Can you see anything on your screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So you're good. Okay. I'm going to continue with the songs until about 7:30, and
Okay.
then come back up.
Hey.
Okay.
Hi,
That will work.
Grace and mercy, love and peace, within on and undying love, baptized in the water, receive love. Oh, when I think about the goodness, the goodness of God, I think about it.
We have time for one more short song. It's about 7:25. This last song is about 4 minutes. And following the next song, then we will begin our midweek Bible study with an opening prayer, introduction of what we will discuss tonight, the introduction of our presenters.
Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Singing, oh Lord, come by here. Somebody praying, Lord, come by here. Somebody praying, Lord, come by here. Somebody praying, Lord, come by here. Singing, oh Lord, come by here. Somebody singing, Lord, come by here. Somebody singing, Lord, come by here. Somebody singing, Lord, come by here. Singing, oh Lord, come by here. You see in my life, take a look. I done had heavy loads. Sometimes my burden gets so hard to bear. But that's the time that I steal away and I talk to my God. I say, Lord, if it's your will, come by here. Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Come by here, my Lord, come by here. Sing it, oh Lord, come by here. Somebody's hurting, Lord, come by here. Somebody's hurting, Lord, come by here. Somebody's hurting, Lord, come by here. Sing it, oh Lord, come by here. Somebody needs you, Lord, come by here. Somebody needs you, Lord, come by here. Somebody needs you, Lord, come by here. Oh Lord, come by here. Pain will come sometimes. Sometimes tears will come. Just hold on and let God keep you in His care and say, Lord, I really need you. Won't you come by here? Come by here, my Lord. Come on by here, my Lord. Come by here. Come by here, my Lord. Come by here. Oh, Lord, oh, Lord. Come by here. Come by here. Come by here, my Lord. Come by here, my Lord. Come by here, my Lord. Come by here. Sing it. Oh, Lord. Come by here. Sing it. Oh, Lord. Come by here. Sing it. Oh, Lord. Come by here. Oh, come by here. Look at them folks over there shouting, Lord. Look at them folks over there just shouting, Lord. Come by here. Sing it. Oh, Lord. Come by here. Sing it. Oh, Lord. Come by here. Oh, Lord. Please come by here. Sing it. Oh, Lord. Come by here. In the midnight. Oh, Lord. Won't you come by here? Need you in the morning. Oh, Lord. Come by here. Oh, Lord. Come by here. Oh, Lord. Come by here.
Thank you so much for joining us for our midweek Bible study. I'm Brother Bruce McClure, the local minister at the Prince George's Church of Christ, located at 7800 Central Avenue in Landover, Maryland. Tonight, we will have somewhat of a different format for our class tonight, and yet the class will be 100% biblical. And I will share that with you as we begin tonight. But as usual, let's begin with an opening prayer. Father, we thank you so much for protecting us. We thank you for providing us with the daily needs that sustain our lives. And Father, we're so thankful to you for hearing our cries on behalf of this pandemic that is sweeping the nation, and that you have opened the doors of relief by giving us a vaccine that is designed for the sole purpose of helping to mitigate the harm that this pandemic is causing in the lives of so many people. I pray tonight that we will be blessed with the information that will be shared, and that we will become the gospel spreaders, the good news spreaders about how this vaccine can truly be a godsend. Bless each of our facilitators tonight, and we give you the glory for all that you have done and all that you will do in our lives. Through Jesus, I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks again for being with us tonight. We are actually on 4 different platforms doing the presentation. We are on YouTube Live. We are also at our church website live. We are also at the church's Facebook page live, and we're also on Zoom. So when we collectively put all 4 of those platforms together, we're actually reaching a vast number of people with our outreach at the Prince George's Church of Christ. Also, I want to thank each person that is going to help us tonight get a better understanding of what this COVID-19 vaccine is all about. And I have 3 people lined up, 4 actually, if she comes on board. But let me introduce each person, and you'll understand from the introduction why I think they are in a space of expertise to talk to us as Christians about the vaccine that is now being given to the American public. First, Dr. Anthony Wutall. Those of you at the Prince George's Church of Christ are aware of the fact that he's one of our shepherds. In another life, he was the dean of the School of Pharmacology at Howard University. And in his present life, he's the provost of Howard. So tonight, he will be wearing the hat of the School of Pharmacology to give us a background look at what goes into creating a vaccine. And I think we're blessed to have Dr. Wutall being willing to share that information with us tonight. Secondly, we have his wife, Sister Dr. Rita Wutall. Dr. Rita is the Director of Health Services at Bowie State University here in the state of Maryland, Bowie, Maryland. And she's going to kind of co-present with Dr. Wutall. And I'm sure that we'll be blessed by that combination of husband and wife team. Third, we have an RN, Alicia Jackson. Alicia was blessed to be with us this summer. She was on a temporary assignment over at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And almost every week, Alicia was in Bible class and worship service. And we just learned to love her and to appreciate her so much. And last week she was on with us in class, and I extended the invitation for her to come back tonight because what I would like for her to present is just from a day-to-day user base, being in that environment, helping people, and the vaccine now coming on the market. Is that a relief? Does that kind of begin to lower the anxiety of the nurses, lower the anxiety of the patients to know that help is on the way? And then I mentioned to you prayerfully a fourth presenter if she's off duty tonight, and that's Dr. Dunmore Simpkins. See, everybody, you need to give me a love deposit because I remembered her last name. I'm in a habit of calling her by her maiden name, Felton, but I wrote it down so that I would not forget Dr. Dunmore Simpkins. But she's actually an anesthesiologist, and we wanted her to talk about just some of the stress relief that the vaccine is going to bring to her work environment. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Anthony Wutall, and then we'll salt and pepper the presentation as necessary, bringing in all of the other presenters. Dr. Wutall.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I have a number of slides. I'll try and go through them quickly because I know we want to leave a lot of time for questions. And some of the slides are going to appear very complex, and there's a reason for that, but I'll explain that as we go along.
I think she's coming on.
So the first slide is a Jeopardy quiz question. Who is this person? I thought it would be helpful to start with this slide because this young lady we're very proud of. Her name is Kizzmekia Corbett, or Kizzy Corbett. She is actually the scientist at NIH who's probably been, in addition to Anthony Fauci, the most responsible for the development of the Moderna vaccine. She's an alum of UMBC, so am I, which is why another reason why we're proud of her. But she also got her PhD in microbiology and immunology from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And she has been involved in the development of the coronavirus, the COVID-19 vaccine from the onset. This has been part of her research work for some time. And so when the genetic sequence for the coronavirus was actually provided by a Chinese scientist early in the epidemic, she and her team at NIH started working, and they collaborated with Moderna to develop the vaccine that Moderna has before the FDA now. So I wanted to let you know, and Dr. Fauci had mentioned this when he was on the town hall last week, that one of the individuals who was most responsible for the development of a vaccine is an African-American woman. And so we'll go. So I wanted to just start, with some basic background. When we talk about COVID-19, COVID-19 is actually the name of the disease. The name of the virus is actually SARS-CoV-2. And so sometimes you may hear SARS. We used to frequently say on the news, the novel coronavirus. It's all the same virus, and it's talking about COVID-19, which is the disease. And when we talk about a pandemic is a worldwide epidemic. And that's the circumstance that we're in now. COVID-19 is affecting every country around the world, probably every region of every country. So it is what we would call a pandemic. And so this is an important slide because it's going to have a lot to do with the vaccines. But coronaviruses get their name because of their shape. Corona is Latin for crown. And if you look at, and this is just a graphic of what the virus looks like, and it sort of appears like a crown. So that's where the name comes from. But probably what is more important for our discussion tonight, the coronavirus has sort of this roundish shape, and this is protein layer. Inside is the genetic material, but on the outside of the virus are these protein spikes, and that's going to be really important. So everybody just keep in mind that on the surface of the coronavirus are these things that we're just going to call spikes. And the reason why that's important for our discussion tonight is that this is what is going to be used and what is being used both by the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine to cause the immune reaction. And that's what leads to us developing immunity to the coronavirus once we get the vaccine, but we'll come back to that. So one of the things that we heard very early, and I'll just repeat it again, is that a lot of these novel, and novel just means new, a lot of these new coronaviruses really come from animal sources. So we know that the coronavirus that is impacting us now, they believe it really started in China, in Wuhan, China, and it was probably the result of people coming in contact with animals, particularly at an animal market in Wuhan. The virus became transmitted to someone at the market, at least one person, and then it spread to other people. But what this slide is just demonstrating is that that's not unusual. We've already seen in a number of circumstances, viruses being transmitted from bats, viruses being transmitted from pigs, from cats, from dogs. So we know that there are a number of different circumstances where viruses and other, we would call them pathogens, have been transmitted from animals to people. And we'll talk a little bit, for example, about viruses that have also been transmitted from cows. That was actually the source of the first vaccine that became very well known. And so in terms of COVID-19, and Alicia could probably speak to this better than I can, but the symptoms of COVID-19, there are actually a lot of different symptoms, and everyone who is infected doesn't have the same symptoms. One of my coworkers called me yesterday because he was diagnosed with COVID-19, and his wife was diagnosed. His two children and his mother were diagnosed, and each of them had different symptoms. He was having a lot of stomach symptoms. He was throwing up. His stomach was upset. He was running to the bathroom frequently. One of the other members in his family did have shortness of breath. His wife just had like flu-like symptoms and was just feeling achy. So, he was just commenting to me that there were 4 or 5 people in his family, and each of them had different symptoms. But the more common symptoms are cough, sore throat, headache, congestion or runny nose. A lot of people also lose their sense of taste and smell. Other flu-like symptoms, fatigue, just feeling tired all the time, muscle and body aches, fevers and chills. Many of you may have watched the Ravens game on Monday night. Nadia and I were watching and we're yelling and screaming. But the Ravens quarterback, Lamar Jackson, was diagnosed with COVID-19 about a week or 2 ago. And he was saying that from the time he was diagnosed, he just slept. He just felt tired and fatigued and just slept for about 10 days. But if you watch the game, one of the other things you'll notice is that in the 4th quarter, he left the field and went to the locker room. because he was having cramps. And, you know, they described it as having cramps on TV. I was reading today, he said everything was cramping. He was getting cramps in his arms, his forearms, his fingers were locking up. He was getting cramps in his calves, and he's never experienced anything like that. And they're speculating that that may have just been sort of, even though he's recovering and he's no longer testing positive, they're speculating that that may have been a result of a consequence of him having had COVID-19. But the Ravens went on to win, if you didn't see the game. That's not today's conversation, right? But this slide, very early on in the epidemic, Johns Hopkins started keeping track of the number of infections around the world, as well as the number of hospitalizations, the number of deaths. And, you know, it's amazing, you know, they created this tracker that you can see here, and you can see in pretty much in every country around the world. The bigger the dots, the more people in that country and in that city are infected. You see the entire United States is red everywhere. But in other parts of the world, you'll also see that this really is a global pandemic. On the left-hand side, and this was as of earlier today, so I tried to be as updated as I could. There have been over 73 million cases around the world. The US now has the largest number of cases. On the right side, you'll see global deaths. The US also has the highest number of deaths, over 305,000. And honestly, that's probably an undercount. But this is what we're looking at all over the world. And so I have a couple of graphs, and I'll explain what they're illustrating, and then I'll make the point later. This is a graph that shows hospitalization rates for people who have confirmed COVID-19. What is the hospitalization rate? And they sort of broke it out by age. And so the top graph is hospitalizations for people 65 and older. And then the next line is people 50 to 64. And then the next line is people 18 to 49. And so what this shows is that it's obviously age related. The older you are, if you're diagnosed with COVID-19, the more likely that you're going to have complications, and the more likely that you're going to be hospitalized. So this is definitely an age-related disease. This next slide, and I want you to remember this slide, because we're going to show you another one just to make another point. If you actually look in the United States at the number of COVID-19 cases by race and ethnicity, the largest number of cases have been among white folks. Almost 50% of the cases have actually been among white people. And then about 26% among Hispanics, about 16% among Blacks, and then a smaller number among Asians. Everybody remember that? So the largest number of cases has been among white people, right? But if you look at hospitalization by race and ethnicity, even though white people have the highest number of cases, you're much more likely to be hospitalized if you're Hispanic, Native American, and Black. And so that's been the concern among Black people in particular, but it really is Blacks and Hispanics, is that not only the reason why that this is such a significant disease, particularly among people of color, is that we are much more likely to have complications and are much more likely to have to be hospitalized compared to white people and other populations. Okay, everybody got that? Okay, so I'm going to shift a little bit, because there's been a lot of conversation about herd immunity, and then so we'll talk about that for a second. When they talk about herd immunity, what really they're saying, they're trying to make a point, is that the more people who either have developed resistance to a disease or who have developed immunity, the less likely it is that the disease is going to be transmitted. And it really comes from, you know, if you've ever seen those movies of I'm trying to remember, the Serengeti in Africa, when you see the migration of animals in the Serengeti. Anyone seen any of those National Geographic or other movies?
Yeah.
So everyone should know what a wildebeest is. You know, those animals that sort of run around in big herds. The point is that if you're a wildebeest and there are 1,000 of you, and there's a lion running around looking to capture somebody, the weaker animals, so the young wildebeest and the very old ones who aren't very fast, if they're in the middle of the pack, they're going to be protected. Not because they're fast or strong, but they're essentially depending on the herd to protect them. And that's what it kind of comes from. But this is an illustration. So just imagine that everybody, every symbol in red is a person with coronavirus, right? Somebody who doesn't have any immunity and they're likely to transmit it to someone else. And so on average, this one person is going to spread it to 4 more people. And then each of them is going to spread it to 4 more people because they don't have any immunity. But in a circumstance where, say, 75% of the population may have some immunity, that means that this one person who has it, even if they come in contact with 4 people, 3 of the 4 are going to be immune. So only one of them is going to be likely to spread it to other people. And so among the 4 people that they may spread it to, 3 of them are going to be immune, okay? So the more people who have this immunity, the less likely that it's going to spread in a large group. And so even people like this guy who isn't immune, because he didn't have exposure to someone who's infected, he's still going to be protected because he's not going to be exposed. So the idea of herd immunity is that they believe, scientists believe, that if at least 70 to 75% of the population becomes immune, it's going to result in a much lower likelihood of the disease continue to spread as rapidly as it has. Does that make sense? Okay. And so these are some of the points, you know, important points in herd immunity. And the first point is that naturally occurring herd immunity from infection. So if there's a disease where a lot of people are dying, herd immunity can occur naturally, but it's only going to occur after a lot of people have died. That's essentially what that point is. But if the disease is not deadly throughout a population, then it is possible for herd immunity to occur without a significant number of deaths. And so the last point is that vaccinations resulting in long-lasting immunity is the most effective way of establishing herd immunity. So this idea of, well, just let everybody get it, you know, eventually if everybody goes out and nobody wears a mask, eventually we'll develop herd immunity. That's probably true, but it's only going to be true after a lot of people have died. And so the way to protect people from dying and still develop herd immunity, the best way is with a vaccine, okay? So I'm gonna talk a little bit about how vaccines work, and some of these slides are going to appear technical, but the reason why I'm going to share them is I want you to see some of the same data that the FDA has received when they make the decision whether or not to approve a vaccine. So some of the slides you're going to see are the same exact slides that were shared with the FDA, as well as a lot of the other data that the FDA has been investigating. So this is sort of a basic, you know, the history of vaccines. And so the only thing I'm really going to spend time talking about is Edward Jenner. A lot of people in science and medicine have probably heard about Edward Jenner and his development of a smallpox vaccination. But a lot of people may not be aware of sort of the background story. The background story is that in England, there was a smallpox epidemic going on, and they had estimated that as much as 20% of the population would die from smallpox. But one of the things that Edward Jenner observed was that milkmaids, women who milked cows, were a lot less likely to get smallpox. As a matter of fact, women who milked cows, for the most part, weren't getting smallpox and weren't dying. And what they realized is that cows get a disease called cowpox. And so the milkmaids, he thought, well, if the milkmaids were exposed to the cowpox, then it probably may have given them some immunity against the smallpox. So he decided to test it out. And what he did was he found a milkmaid who had smallpox, and she had these pustules or bumps on her hand. And he took some of the pus in the bump in her hand, and he vaccinated a little boy with the cowpox pus. And so sure enough, when the boy was exposed to the smallpox, he didn't get it. So he developed immunity to the smallpox because of the pus from the cowpox that he had been exposed to, okay? There'll be a quiz at the end of my presentation. So how do vaccines work? And we'll talk about that for a second. The way that vaccines work, there are germs all around us. And when you hear someone talk about a pathogen is a germ. And so a pathogen can be a virus, it can be a bacteria, it can be a fungus, but there are germs and pathogens all around us. We actually have a lot around us, but our body, our skin, for one, protects us against them. But when someone is susceptible and they are exposed to a harmful pathogen, it can lead to disease and death, okay? When a pathogen infects the body, when a germ infects the body, our body's defenses, called the immune system, are triggered. And the germ or the pathogen can be attacked and destroyed even if it enters our body. And so the body has a natural immune response. And whether the pathogen is a bacteria, or it's a virus, or it's a parasite, or it's a fungus, every pathogen is made up of several parts. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a second. And let's just call it a subpart. So the subpart of the germ that causes the formation of antibodies in our body is what we call an antigen. And so when you hear scientists and physicians talk about antigens, antigens are just small subparts of a pathogen. So an antigen is like a part of a virus, or a part of a bacteria, or a part of a fungus. And the antibodies that our body produces, we can consider them like soldiers. And so in the body's immune defense system, the antibodies are our soldiers that protect us and that are trained to recognize specific antigens. In our bodies, we actually have thousands of different antibodies that we already have in our system. Why? Because over the course of a lifetime, we're exposed to so many different things that our body produces antibodies to a lot of these things that we're exposed to. When the human body is exposed to an antigen for the first time, it takes time for the immune system to respond and to produce antibodies that are specific to that antigen. And one of the reasons why this coronavirus has been such a big problem is because it was sort of in the animal system and hadn't been exposed to people before. Everyone that is being exposed to, this is the first time that we're seeing it. And so our bodies were just not prepared to deal with it. And so that's why, the symptoms have in many cases been worse than the flu, because we see the flu almost every year, even though we're not immune to it. It's like, we've seen that before. and our body responds. But the first time our bodies are exposed to an antigen, it may take some time for the body to produce antibodies. And so in the meanwhile, while the body is working to produce antibodies, the person is susceptible to becoming ill. Once the antibodies are produced, they work with the rest of the immune system to identify the pathogen, the germ, and to stop the disease, okay? Antibodies to one germ or to one pathogen doesn't necessarily protect against another pathogen, except if they're very similar to each other, in the same way that the cowpox and the smallpox were very similar. And so there are cases where if the pathogens are very similar, the body will still mount an immune response. But once the body produces antibodies, it also creates what we call antibody producing memory cells. In other words, the body wants to make sure that if we ever see this again, we have to make sure that we mount a response. So there are actually cells in our body that act like memory cells, and they sort of go around looking to see, oh, we've seen that before, and we know how to respond because we've seen it before. And so what does that mean? It means that if someone is exposed to a dangerous pathogen in the future, their immune system is going to be able to respond immediately and protect against that disease. And so this, on this slide, what we see is like, this is the measles pathogen, and there's an existing antibody to it. And then there's also those of you who've had chickenpox, your body has existing antibodies to the chickenpox. If you've had the flu before, believe it or not, your body has existing antibodies to the flu. But when there's a new pathogen, a new germ, your body doesn't have antibodies yet. It has to produce it. And until it produces it, you're probably going to get sick. Okay. So the way that vaccines help is that vaccines contain either weakened or inactive parts of a particular germ, of a particular antigen, and that triggers an immune response within the body. New vaccines also can contain the blueprint for producing antigens rather than the antigen itself. And that's what we'll see with the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. But regardless of whether the vaccine is made up of an antigen itself or it's made up of the blueprint, the body will produce antibodies, or the goal is for the body to produce antibodies, but not actually result in us getting the disease itself. Okay, everybody with me? Okay, so we won't spend a lot of time on this, but this is sort of, this is an illustration of the coronavirus, and there are actually over 100 different vaccines that are being tested all over the world. And there are different ways that the different techniques that they're using to develop vaccines. So for example, one of the ways that you could develop a vaccine to coronavirus is to actually take the coronavirus itself and try to inactivate it or to make it weaker. And so if you give somebody that inactivated or weaker vaccine, vaccine from the coronavirus, it should result in an immune response. Another way that they're developing vaccines is what we call with non-coronavirus vectors, and we won't spend a lot of time talking about that. But another way is using either DNA or RNA from the coronavirus, and that's what they're doing actually with the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine. And another way that they're developing vaccines is they're taking just some proteins from the virus itself in the hopes that if you're exposed to the protein, your body will say, oh, wait, what's that? It'll produce an antibody to the protein on the surface, and then that will result in an immune response. So there's several different ways that vaccines are being developed for coronavirus. And so because the first two vaccines that the FDA is reviewing. It's already approved, the Pfizer vaccine. The Moderna one, it's actually investigating now and will probably make a decision by Friday. Both of them are what we call mRNA vaccines. mRNA stands for messenger RNA, and these are new types of vaccines. They've been tested in the past, but they've never gotten to the point that they were approved for use in human populations. So the concept of an mRNA vaccine is not new, but these are the first ones that have actually gotten to the approval stage with the Food and Drug Administration. But mRNA vaccines, they essentially, the way that they work is they use mRNA or messenger RNA to teach the cells in our body to produce a protein. It's actually just a piece of a protein that is very similar to the virus protein. So what happens, and I'll show you a graphic in a second, is that our own cells are producing proteins that look similar to the virus protein. And then when it's released into the body, our body is like, whoa, that's new. We've never seen that before. And our body produces antibodies to that. So it means that you don't have to inject someone with an inactive coronavirus or a weakened coronavirus. You just use a small part of the virus mRNA, and then our bodies produce the protein that is then recognized to produce the antibodies. And so it, let me see, okay, so this is a graphic. So when we talk about the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine, this is exactly what the vaccine is. It's a small piece of messenger RNA. And in order for it to safely get in the body and in the cell, it's actually covered in fat. And so there's a lot of fat that protects this messenger RNA. And the messenger RNA is very sensitive. That's why the vaccine has to be delivered in sub-freezing temperatures. And so you hear them talk about it has to be -70 degrees or it has to be delivered with dry ice. Is because the messenger RNA is not very stable. So the vaccine is actually delivered frozen, and then it comes to room temperature before it's given to somebody. But this is a human cell. So the way that this vaccine works is that somebody will be injected with the messenger RNA and the fat that covers it. Once it gets into the body, our cells will actually take it in. And then our cells will take that messenger RNA. It will produce the spike protein. Remember, we said that on the coronavirus, there are these spikes. So our body will actually produce this spike protein, and then it will sort of be ejected out of our cells. And then the immune system will say, hey, wait a minute, we've never seen this before. And our body will start producing antibodies to this strange protein that it's never seen before. So this is another graphic to sort of show how that works. So when we get the vaccine, it's going to be incorporated into our body with the fat is protecting the mRNA until it gets incorporated into our cells. The mRNA is released in our cells. Our cells actually produce the spike protein. And once it's put out into the body, our immune system recognizes, hey, wait a minute, we've never seen that before. And we start producing antibodies to it, okay? And so the next time, so someone who has had the vaccine, our body has already started producing antibodies to the spike protein. So if you're exposed to someone with coronavirus, our body says, hey, wait a minute, we've seen that before. And the antibodies immediately take effect and protect us from becoming ill. Okay, does that make sense?
And the spike protein is from the crown.
Right. And so, you know, some of the concerns that people have, well, wait a minute, this is new. They're experimenting with this new stuff that has never been used before. Well, as I was saying, the mRNAs vaccines are not new. They've actually been developed and studied for the flu. They've been studied for, remember Zika, everybody was worried about a few years ago. They've actually developed some for rabies and cytomegalovirus, but they haven't been approved. They haven't presented them to the FDA for approval because we're in a pandemic and it's a circumstance where millions of people are potentially at risk to die. Governments around the world cooperated with pharmaceutical companies, and they really put a lot of investment in developing a vaccine. So the technology is not necessarily brand new. It's technology that we've had for a number of years, but this is the first time that a vaccine has actually been approved and is being used to protect people. This the Pfizer vaccine has been approved in England already. It's been approved in Canada. So a number of other countries have already started also approving it. In the interest of time, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, but what I wanted to show is the way that vaccines are typically reviewed and approved. When there's a vaccine that has been developed, usually it takes a while for it to get to approval, and that's because it has to be tested in animals before it's tested in people, and that's what we call the preclinical phase. And then it has to go through phase 1 testing, where you give it to healthy people to test what is a safe dose and what is an effective dose, and that has already been done. And then you take it to phase 2, which is clinical trials in people who might be exposed to coronavirus, just to see whether or not it's effective. If it seems to be safe and effective in phase 2, then it goes to phase 3. And if it's safe and effective in phase 3, then it moves through approval. The vaccine that Pfizer and Moderna have developed have actually gone through each of these phases, but they have been accelerated because of the risk of the disease. What these numbers are showing are other coronavirus vaccines that are in testing. And so there are 87 that are actually still in preclinical phase, 38 in phase 1, 16 in phase 2. There were 3 in phase 3. This is a slide from, I think, July, but there's one that's already been approved by the FDA. Now, this is a slide that shows the timeline for the Pfizer vaccine that was just approved. So you'll see it actually went through the same phases. It went through the animal studies, and that was done, in March and April. And then phase 1 testing, which took place in Germany, and then the phase 2 and the phase 3 trials. So the vaccine has already been tested in over 40-something thousand people. And so real quickly, the way that vaccines are approved by the FDA, I won't go through all of this, but the FDA doesn't actually do the testing themselves. What the FDA does is it assesses and it scrutinizes data that companies present based on the research that they've done. And so the FDA doesn't do the clinical trials, but the FDA is responsible for assuring that the clinical trials are done correctly and appropriately. Then the FDA actually reviews the data that the companies have provided and assesses whether the potential benefits outweigh the potential risks. And so after approval, one of the things and the points that I wanted to make is that every drug has risks. There's no drug and there's no vaccine in the world that is 100% without risk. The question that the FDA and scientists have to ask again is, are the potential benefits, do they outweigh any potential risks? And so when you have a disease like COVID-19, where over 300,000 people have died in this country, and they anticipate that millions more may die, you have to weigh that against any potential risk from the vaccines. But we'll talk a little bit more about the risk. So one of the other points that I also wanted to make is, even after the vaccine is approved, it's going through a different approval mechanism. And so the companies are going to have to continue to do studies, and they're going to have to continue to submit data to the FDA to assure that that the benefits will continue to outweigh the risks. And so what is different about these drugs, about these vaccines, is they're going through a process called emergency use authorization. And so the FDA is essentially creating the opportunity for the vaccines to be made available because we're in a global emergency. We're in a global pandemic. What that means for us is that the companies are required to continue to, everyone who is in the clinical trials, they have to continue to follow them and continue to submit data to the FDA. Everyone who actually gets the vaccine, the companies are also responsible for having some monitoring system in place so that if there are any side effects, those are also reported and that they're keeping track of this. So what does the data say? And I'm gonna show you the same data, some of the same data that the FDA has gotten, and then you can see how they're making some of these decisions. So this is a chart showing the side effects that people have had in the clinical trials or in the studies with the Pfizer vaccine. And so within 7 days after getting the first dose, there were two groups of people. There was a group that got the vaccine, the actual vaccine, and there was another group that got a placebo. In other words, they may have gotten an injection of water, probably saline, but they didn't get the actual vaccine. And so the most common side effects were fatigue or tiredness, headache, but you see even in people who got the placebo, in other words, they didn't get anything, but they also got fatigue and headache. And so what the FDA has to assess is there a much greater likelihood of these side effects among the people who got the actual vaccine compared to the people who got the placebo? So some of the other side effects, a small number of people got fever, some got chills, some got diarrhea, muscle pains, joint pains. And so this is after the second dose. So remember, both with the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, you have to get 2 doses. And the reason is with the Pfizer vaccine, what they realize is after 1 dose, it's about 50% effective. But if you get the second dose, it's over 95% effective in preventing you from getting COVID-19. And so in people who got the second dose, you see there was a much higher likelihood of fatigue, headache, muscle pain, and joint pain were the most likely side effects. And so this is sort of the big one in terms of what the FDA is looking at. And this is what this is asking is 7 days after someone got 7 days after someone got the second dose of the vaccine, what was the likelihood or how many people in each group developed coronavirus, right? So among the people, 18,000 people who got the actual vaccine, after the second dose, only 8 of them developed coronavirus. Among the people who got the fake or the placebo, about 18,000 of them, 162 of them developed coronavirus. So there was a much higher number of people who got coronavirus with the placebo compared to those who were diagnosed with coronavirus who got the vaccine. Everyone understand? Okay. And so won't spend a lot of time with this since we're running short on time. But what this slide is showing, again, the point I was making before, there are a lot of vaccines that are going through testing. This is a slide from July. At that point, there were 125 vaccines that were being tested in animals. And then you see in phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, that's sort of what this slide is also showing. But this slide is showing that there are specific vaccines in China. There are actually a couple of other vaccines that have been approved and that they're using in China. They were giving it first to their military, this CanSino. And in Russia, Russia had approved their own vaccine that they're also using. And so this is the last slide and the key points I wanted everyone to go home with. The first point is help is on the way. The vaccines have been demonstrated to be effective, but it is not a silver bullet. It's not a cure-all. We're going to still have to continue to wear masks, wash our hands, remain physically distant, and we'll explain why in a second. But there's several new vaccines that are going to be approved over the next year. I expect that the Moderna vaccine will probably be approved this week, if not next week. And so by the end of this year, we'll have 2 vaccines approved. Going into January or February, there are probably 2 or 3 others that are going to be approved. So there are going to be a lot well, there are going to be choices in terms of which vaccines are available. And the other ones, other than Moderna and Pfizer, use other mechanisms other than the mRNA. But because these are new medications, like any new medication, we're going to have to continue to monitor for several years to determine any long-term complications or side effects. And I tell this to everybody, every drug has side effects. Every drug, it doesn't matter. Aspirin, some of you take, antibiotics, drugs we use to treat cancer. Every drug has side effects. And so if someone is looking for a vaccine that has no side effects and no complications, you're not going to find that in this world. Airlines and other companies have started requiring negative COVID-19 tests for customers and employees. It's not going to be out of the question that some may also begin requiring vaccines or evidence of an immune response. And so my last point is be safe, be sensible, and weigh the potential risks to the potential benefits. People have asked me, am I going to get the vaccine? And my answer is yes. I actually I had signed up to participate in the clinical trial, and I didn't get chosen. I felt like I was rejected. They didn't choose me to participate, but I have enough confidence in the vaccines, particularly the Moderna one, because I know Kizzy Corbett was involved in the development of that one. But I think that we have enough information now to make an informed decision whether or not to get these vaccines. Certainly, I think as time goes along, we're going to have more information and more data. We know, for example, that people who have severe allergic reactions, they're already suggesting that they should not get it yet. So if you have a history of severe allergic reactions, I know there's one case in California, there were a couple of cases in England of people who've had reactions. But if you get the vaccine, the most common, probably the first day you'll have soreness in your arm, like almost a lot of other vaccines. Some people get, chills. Some people feel, a little fatigue. But even among people who've had those symptoms, it typically has resolved within a day or two. So I'll stop there. Hopefully, Brother McClure, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. Dr. Wuthoff, thank you so much for just giving us not just a short overview, but an in-depth overview of this entire vaccine process and what led to the vaccine. Now I would like to invite our RN, Alicia Jackson, to chime in about the optimism just coming from a practical nurse's perspective. Alicia, you were here for 13 weeks, 13 weeks, specifically to help in the COVID-19 pandemic in Baltimore. So from a nurse's perspective that actually care for individuals, what is the optimism in the nursing sector about the vaccine? What are you guys experiencing?
Absolutely get the vaccine. Of course, they make it mandatory for us unless you have like religious reasons that you can, or you have like serious medical issues as to why you can't. They make it mandatory. So it's very similar to the flu. Like it's mandatory for us to get the flu vaccine as well. And if you don't get it, like you have to wear a mask for the entire flu season. So yeah, definitely get the vaccine. The benefit far outweighs the risk for any skepticism you may have. He did mention the herd immunity. So I think they say like once, I think 60 to 90% or so of the population is immunized, that you then can have that herd immunity effect. But with this being so highly contagious, like coronavirus itself is not new. For as long as I've been a nurse, been in the hospitals, we've had coronavirus patients. We do the nasal swab, and like it comes back with a full panel of respiratory diseases. The patients typically present with flu-like symptoms, the shortness of breath, runny nose, those kinds of symptoms, just like the flu, the body aches, those things. So we do the nasal swab, of course, we rule them out, isolate them, do the nasal swab, and it comes back with this panel. So this coronavirus is not new. This particular strand, or the SARS stands for severe acute respiratory syndrome. So anything that's a syndrome is like a collection of symptoms. So it's a wide range of symptoms, including those GI symptoms. So fever is pretty common. He mentioned a lot of the side effects. It presents just like the flu. It's highly contagious, but definitely get the vaccine. The benefit far outweighs the risk for sure.
Now, are you scheduled or have you already received the vaccine?
I haven't yet. So I haven't started my next contract. So whenever when I start my next contract, it'll be mandatory for me to get the vaccine. I think they started administering here in Houston on yesterday. So I think one of the hospitals got their dose on Tuesday and then started to administer. And then there's several others are getting it today and some other times. But yeah, so it'll definitely be mandatory for us, and I'll get it.
So in the nursing sector, there's a degree of excitement, anticipation.
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely.
Great. Now, Dr. Felton, I saw her log in. Are you still on?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us as well. I met Dr. Simpkins. Before you logged in, I actually formally introduced you as Dr. Simpkins. Let the record show that.
He did.
I'm still working on changing it everywhere though. So
and then I fell off the wagon. But in the work environment that you're in, if a person comes in to have any type surgery, for the most part, they're receiving some type anesthesia, right? Mm-hmm. What is that like for people coming in for other procedures into a surgical environment? And are they focusing on their surgical procedure, or are they focusing on, am I going to get COVID by being in this environment?
Some patients are appropriately concerned,
mm-hmm.
because all of our patients, if you're having an elective surgery, you have to be COVID tested within, I say 5 to 7 days, because depending on the facility I'm at, they have different time frames. But unfortunately, what I have seen is some patients who get their negative test result and they misinterpret their negative test result to mean that they don't have to wear a mask, mm-hmm. which doesn't make any sense at all. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to sort of combat that a little bit, that you got the negative test result, but you still have to wear the mask to protect yourself from getting it. But all of our patients have to be tested. And so like some patients are very, very concerned, and they really, really appreciate all of the extra steps we're taking, because we all have on some type of N95 or some type of some form of that with a surgical mask on top of it, as well as eye protection. And so they really appreciate it. And I think it helps with some of their fears when they see us come in the room and we're completely covered to that extent. And for the most part, you really don't need to delay your medical care, because we really are trying to take the proper steps to keep even elective surgeries going right now. So I do believe that we have everything in place for someone to come to the hospital, have a surgery, and not get COVID. But they have to understand that we're going to ask you to get tested, say 5 to 7 days before you show up, and then quarantine yourself.
Okay.
We really just need patience to do that part. And we really can take care of you in the hospital and you not get COVID. And if it's emergency care, emergency surgery, just come to the hospital. You don't have to be COVID tested for that. We would just approach it as if you did have it.
Okay. So we've looked at, from a pharmaceutical perspective, from a direct care in the nursing side, but as the direct medical providers of the surgical procedures, providing the anesthesia for the procedures, is there a great anticipation, or what is the level of anticipation just in the physician community about the vaccine? How is it being received?
They wanted the number of emails that went across from like the other anesthesiologists in my group this past weekend was just off the chain. I just started deleting them. They wanted, I hate to say it, if they could figure out a way to jump the line, they would push everybody out of the way and go get it. Our hospital, I'm not quite sure if they started administering this week. I think they have, but you get an email invitation. And I know that they're starting like with ICU staff and the anesthesiologists who volunteer to go to the ICU again. Which, as you know, our numbers have gone up. So they've asked us to start staffing the ICU again. And so they've started with those anesthesiologists and they will get it this week.
Howard started we received it yesterday, Tuesday morning, and we started administering it to our clinicians and our frontline healthcare providers yesterday.
Now,
I won't get it this week because I did not volunteer to go back to the ICU.
So you will get it this week?
Month. I'm not going to go back.
Okay. Now, just from a public health look, Dr. Rita Wutall, you're in public health or at Bowie State. What is that community? Because you're dealing with so many students, the faculty. What is the anticipation in the college environment for the vaccine?
Well, I think that generally, I think within our communities, there's some hesitation or reservation, even amongst the other health center directors that I'm in contact with at the other HBCUs. There's a little bit of reservation. I don't think they fully comfortable with getting the vaccine yet. We had a presentation earlier today with a businesswoman in Baltimore who's in charge of, she's developed the software. So over half the country, they'll be using her software for that. And she's in partnership with health departments across the country. So as a Black woman, I wanted her to come address the health directors so that they can start to process it, that as leaders within our, as at HBCUs, leaders within our community, we have to start having the conversation with, staff and employees and students about the vaccine that's coming up. For the universities, we will be in phase 2. And so that is more anticipated around March, April, that the vaccine would be available to us, more like around the general public side. But for right now, and I've been talking to the PG Health Department, on a weekly basis. The quantities of vaccine is very limited right now. Even PG Health Department does not have the Pfizer vaccine right now. They are waiting for Moderna to be, they're anticipating getting the Moderna vaccine in January. And then we would partner with them to get small quantities from PG Health Department. So right now, I think for Pfizer, it's about 100 to 150,000 doses, I understand, are coming to Maryland. So very small quantities for essential health personnel and nursing home people at this time.
Okay, great. So as far as community service, what do you feel churches can do, such as ourselves? Alicia is in Houston. What can churches do to raise the awareness of the efficacy of the vaccine, the safety of the vaccine? Dr. Wutah, you mentioned the herd immunity that we can more rapidly realize from the vaccine. What can churches do to communicate a more favorable message about the vaccine?
Well, I think we can just share actual information and factual information. There's a lot of misinformation going on. Hold on.
All the way down.
Oh, I'm sorry. So there's a lot of misinformation going on around the country, particularly because this has become such a political illness, and that's unfortunate that that's the direction it's taken. But I think what we could do is just share factual information with folks about what is, actually available. Maybe talk about some of the myths that people are hearing, and have people, actually share factual information to be helpful. I actually, I don't want to put Terrence on the spot, but I was curious if he wanted to make any comments. Maybe he's not available.
I was on mute. I'm here.
Okay.
No, I'm here.
Okay, and just for those of you who may not know, Terrence was actually in the Moderna study. And with that, Terrence.
Yeah, so I guess I got in the phase 3 trial in, I think it was around September 14th. So I've had both shots, and I unblinded myself by getting the antibody test. So I am antibody positive. So I experienced pretty much the side effects after the second shot, the booster shot. I ran a fever for about a day, about 101 degrees, had chills and body aches. But after about 12 to 14 hours, that passed. I probably harassed Brother Wutah all day that day, sending him screenshots of thermometers and stuff. But after that, I've been fine. I hadn't had any adverse effects. I check in once a week via app that I have on my phone. And even this week, with the expected emergency use authorization from Moderna, that vaccine to be granted, they are going to give participants the option to unblind to see if they, a lot of people in the trials have already unblinded themselves. I'm in various groups of people that have done exactly what I did. We went and got antibody tests and paid for it ourselves. But they are making the vaccine available to those that did get the placebo and choose to take the vaccine. So I think that is actually pretty phenomenal. But you still expect it, to continue to participate, because it is a 2-year study. So they'll still follow me. And, I get phone calls once a month with the study doctor from GW. But the experience itself has been, great. I couldn't have probably gotten better healthcare outside of NIH and GW. So I felt really safe taking it, and it's been a good process. And, I've tried to do my part and evangelize that I did take it, and it wasn't adverse, and hadn't I didn't get any really bad side effects or anything. So, and I definitely did have underlying health conditions. So I had I have high blood pressure, hypertension.
Have you ever got the flu vaccine?
Yep, I get the flu vaccine every year.
So have you ever had reactions to the flu vaccine?
No, I've never had a reaction to the flu. I got the flu vaccine this year. I just had to wait. I had to wait 14 days after my second my booster shot to actually get the flu vaccine, but I didn't have any issues with that this year, and I hadn't had any with it before.
I just got a note from my sister-in-law down in Arkansas. Zeddy said that the city of Jonesboro got the shots in on yesterday. And Jonesboro is where Arkansas State University is. So it's a college town. But it's great to know that in that area, Eastern Arkansas, one of the more remote areas, but they have the vaccine on site. Okay. Any other comments before we go from the professionals that have agreed to come on tonight?
Actually have a question. And so once people get the vaccine, and I don't know if any of you guys know the answer to this, are they then allowed to unmask? Because when I've had that question at work, I've said, no, you still have to wear your mask. I don't, from a scientific, like the science part of my mind says you should be able to take your mask off. I mean, we know that obviously not everyone's vaccine is going to be effective.
Yeah, so there are a couple of reasons why they're still encouraging everyone to still wear a mask. One is the vaccine is not 100% effective. And so even if it's 95% effective, it still means that there's a small group of people who it's not going to work in. But the other thing is that once you get the vaccine, you don't immediately produce antibodies. It's going to be produced over a period of time. So if you get vaccinated today and you don't wear a mask tomorrow, you're still possibly at risk for getting COVID-19. And the first dose, they say, is about 50% effective. And so it's after the second one. So there's probably like I would say a 1 to 2 month window of time that, after you're vaccinated, that you're still potentially at risk. But the other reason that I've heard is if you're vaccinated, it essentially will mean that you won't get COVID, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that if you're exposed, you can't carry it. So you could still potentially, you can be vaccinated, but you could still potentially put someone else at risk if you're exposed and they haven't been vaccinated or haven't got it. So I think it's after our bodies develop the antibodies to it, the concern is potentially someone else still being at risk because they don't know that the vaccine means that you won't carry it at all. It just means that you won't get the disease.
I was also going to say that they're also not sure how long the vaccine will be effective. So it may be, a year or 2 years. So it'll sort of be a waning type of immunity or protection as well, too. But yeah, the possibly that nasal carriage would be another reason to still wear the mask. And I think we're going to probably run into some resistance from people once they feel like, because nobody's really been talking about it publicly so much on TV. So people feel like, okay, once you get the vaccine, you should be free. And all the pictures and advertising is back to normal. You're at the football game, with no mask. And people are going to be angry because they're going to feel like, well, I thought if I took this vaccine, we'd be back to normal, and this is still not back to normal wearing the mask. So we are going to encounter that. And then I think also in our community, we're going to encounter some non-compliance with coming back for that second dose, at least for those two vaccines where you have to do 2 shots. maybe for in our community, going with one of the single dose might be better because, we have to, we need a little bit of support there to get back for that second dose or some incentive.
We're hard-headed.
Yeah. For those that have tuned in, and you might wonder, well, what type of Bible study have we had tonight? We've had a very practical Bible study. In the book of Luke, chapter 5, verse 31, Jesus made a declaration. Those who are whole do not need a physician. Well, we are in a global pandemic where over 300,000 people in the US alone has died. So we can't say we don't need the physicians. We definitely need the physicians because we are in the middle of a matter that only the medical community that are servants of the Lord. The medical community is a servant of the Lord, but the Lord is using the servants called the physicians, the scientists, the pharmacists, the nurses, to bless us at this time. Also in Colossians 4, verse number 14, Paul, during his imprisonment, would make a declaration. There are people with me, Demas is with me, but you know who else he lists is with him? Luke the physician. There are times in our lives where we need gospel preachers with us. We need our families with us, but there are times in our lives where we need physicians to be with us. And I believe it's such a time as this that we need what the physicians have to offer us, the vaccines that are being developed in the scientific community. And as a congregation, I think we are tremendously blessed to have among us Dr. Anthony Wootall, Dr. Rita Wootall, Dr. Dunwar Simpkins, the RN Alicia Jackson, Dr. Wilhelmina Taylor. I mean, can you imagine a congregation having so many individuals among us? And it is for such a time as this. And I just want to thank each of you for taking time tonight to bless all of us. And I want to encourage all of the members, no matter what platform you're on, share this information with others, retweet it or forward it. But information is power. And Dr. Wootall, the next up from him, the president of Howard University, was just on national broadcast last week interviewing Dr. Fauci. So we're talking about one among us that is only one step removed from the most noted researcher in the world. And I'm saying we need to be thankful and we need to share that. The African Americans that have been participating in developing the vaccine, we need to share that with the world as well. And with that being said, thank you again. And I just pray that we will all remain diligent, wear masks, do the social distancing until we receive the email that is our time to come and receive the shot.
I'm curious, do we have time for any questions? Maybe one or two questions?
Okay, I'm flexible.
Okay. I'm always curious to hear the conspiracy theories if anybody has any questions.
Are there any questions?
Dr. Wootall, I had a quick question. I was just curious. I noticed in your slide you said it was for people over 12 years old. Have they rolled out a plan for children at all?
Yeah, and that's a good question. The issue is that when they do clinical trials or when they do experimental studies like this, especially with new drugs, they don't start with children. They don't test them in children. They think it will be effective in children, but because there weren't children in the clinical trials, they want to just be careful and start with people who are adults or who were of the age of other individuals who were in the clinical trials. Actually, there's a different age. I think the Pfizer vaccine is for ages 16 and older. I think Moderna is actually requesting approval for 18 and older. And it's really because they want to limit it at first to age groups that they actually studied in the trials, and then we'll probably expand it out from there.
I have a question.
Okay, this is Sister Reddick.
Yeah. What if you have a low immune system? Would you be eligible to get that vaccine, or would it be safe to get that vaccine?
I'm not sure.
I say more data will be coming out.
Yeah, I think as they're coming out with more data, they'll probably make that decision. The only thing I've seen is that they've suggested that people who have a history of allergies, severe allergies, wait. But I haven't heard them make any comment regarding people whose immune system maybe. I actually imagine that they may encourage it. You know, people who, for example, may have other, immune systems that may actually make them more susceptible to COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine that they would still probably encourage the vaccine, but probably your doctor would be the best person to check with.
Okay. And what if you're on other medications? Would that bother any, like if you have a heart condition and you're on blood thinner and medications of that type, would the reaction be the same as if you take the flu shot?
Yeah, the honest answer is we don't know. Again, because the vaccine is being, even though, when we say it's been tested in 40,000, 50,000, 60,000 people, it sounds like a lot of people, but when it's actually going to be used in hundreds of millions of people, oftentimes we learn more about a drug once it's been approved than we knew during clinical trials, because it's now going to be available in people that it wasn't initially tested in.
Okay.
But probably, I mean, and again, I'm just speculating, but if you would be eligible for the flu shot, I would imagine that your physician, unless you have, some other severe complication, that physicians would probably still recommend it when it's available.
So the same thing that's in the flu shot, in the vaccine, is it the same and the same?
No,
it's
not the same. It's
Okay.
It's different.
Okay, I have two questions that have come in through Facebook. The first one, can you address the concerns that this vaccine was created too quickly? Hasn't the Moderna vaccine been in development for years, and they were able to target this strand of a virus faster? And following that, I have a second inquiry that I have asthma. Should I take the shot?
So I'll start with the first one. The technology, meaning the mRNA technology, is not new. It's been available for a number of years, and there are other vaccines that they have tested using the mRNA, and I had gone through a couple of them in the presentation. They've actually tested it in flu. They've tested it in rabies and for other diseases, but this is the first vaccine that it will be FDA approved for using that technology. So it's not as though someone just came up with this in February and they've rushed it through. The technology itself has been available, has been tested. But that being said, it is still a new vaccine. And because the technology is new, we still want to be careful in terms of monitoring people and making sure that the companies are keeping track of any side effects and keeping track of anything unusual that happens. But at the end of the day, the main question is, are the potential benefits outweighing the potential risks?
Yes.
And I think everyone probably knows someone who's been hospitalized with COVID-19. A lot of us know people who have died from it. That's a big risk. So if you ask me, do the potential benefits outweigh the risk? To me, they do.
Absolutely.
Just to say, so Brother Wuta spoke to like the vaccine itself and it not being new. The emergency use authorization, the program that the FDA used to approve this vaccine, that's not new. That's something that the FDA has had in place, and they've approved other drugs quickly to get them to market. They're just not drugs that we're familiar with. So though this drug was developed quickly, they still have a way to oversee it and monitor it. One of the anesthesiologists that I work with, and soon to be two, actually, she works for the FDA. And so along this journey, she's been able to give us feedback. And so even though we know that there are things going on politically, the FDA is still doing its job. And so this is their process that they use to approve this drug is not a new process. They've done it before, and they'll still have what we call post-market surveillance going on. And that's something that they have in place for every drug that they approve.
Okay. Yeah, maybe the other point I'll make is that the vaccine is being tested all over the world. It's being tested in Germany, it's being tested in England, it's being tested in Canada. And those countries, Canada and England, were really the first two to approve it. I think there are other countries that have approved it for use. The FDA, the record of the FDA is that it is the most stringent and it is the most careful drug approval agency in the world. And so if the FDA approves it, it doesn't mean that it's 100% sure thing, but I have more confidence in the FDA than I do in a lot of other. For example, I wouldn't take the vaccine that's been approved in Russia or the one that's been approved in China. I would take the one that's been approved by the FDA.
Good point.
The final question.
Hold on, Brother McClure. I want to speak to the heart condition that she mentioned, and being on a blood thinner specifically. One of the biggest complications with COVID with the ICU patients was throwing clots. So once the inflammatory cascade begins, you go septic and you have the inflammatory cascade, the throwing the clots was huge. So there again, the benefit versus the risk is number one. So I highly recommend the vaccine.
Thank you.
Okay. The final question related to having asthma. And should a person with asthma feel comfortable taking the vaccine?
Absolutely. Every patient that I had that had COVID, all of the respiratory syndrome patients, our COPD, asthma patients, heart failure patients, fluid overload, all of them that had respiratory complications, those were the ones that had the hardest time. Those were the ones that end up going to the ICU, had to be intubated, those kinds of things. So definitely risk versus benefit, and the risk is higher if you have a respiratory condition.
Okay. Well, we could continue until midnight, but I just, again, want to thank you for your patience and for just the precious information that has been shared in a very concise, a very clear way that I think the audience could really grasp. And words just cannot express our appreciation for this. Let's close out with a word of prayer.
I'll just say, Brother McClure, if everyone found the slides helpful, I didn't make them up myself. I got them from a number of reliable medical sources. I'll be glad to share them. if everybody, thinks it would be helpful.
Oh, let me mention this. Because this is going out at the church's Facebook page, the presentation is actually archived on Facebook. And also it's archived at the YouTube site. So the entire presentation can be picked up, Brother Wutall, even with the slides already intact. Okay. Brother Wutall, did you hear that? Okay, great. Okay, let's close out with a word of prayer. Father, we thank you so much for the fellowship that we've enjoyed tonight, for the opportunities that we've had tonight to hear from just a vast variety of clinical, from research, from the pharmaceutical community, from the direct care community, about this vaccine and the pandemic, and how profitable it will be to not only African Americans, but to all people to benefit from this vaccine. And I just pray that the awareness that has been shared with us, the information, has raised our awareness, and that it will help us to continue to learn more about how this vaccine can help us return to normal, our normalcy of worship, our normalcy of fellowship, our normalcy of being out with our families and friends. And I just pray that you will continue to protect us and grant us wisdom and discernment until the vaccine is made available to the general public. We love you, and we just thank you for all that you continue to do in our lives. Through Jesus, I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
And please be safe.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Brother McClure.
Good night, everybody. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay. Night.
Night, Dad. Good night, everyone.
Hey, Marcus. Good night.
Marcus.
We were listening, but I was cooking dinner for the kids. So
Okay, because it's still early out there.
yes, a little after 6.
Okay. All right. Well, look, enjoy dinner.
Okay, thank you.
God bless. Love you. Hey, Q.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
They want to say bye. Sorry.
Okay.
Oh, look at them. Cute. Wow. Thank God for technology.
Okay.